Hi folks, welcome to the show, and the brand new Phineas and Ferb movie is finally out, and after 5 years, it's so great to finally see all these characters again. Crossover special notwithstanding. So naturally, the only thing people care about is going to be comparing Candace Against the Universe with the first movie Across the Second Dimension. And since I want views, I will naturally be hopping on this bandwagon. So today, it's a showdown between the movie that came out at the height of the show's popularity and the one that was released way past its expiration date. We're going to be pitting these two completely different movies against each other to find out which one has the better story, the better characters, the better visuals, and of course, the best songs. Got it? Okay, let's jump right in. Since it came first, let's start with Across the Second Dimension. Released in 2011 during the show's third season, this movie answers the question of what would happen if Phineas and Ferb discovered Perry's secret identity, which apparently involved dimensional travel and a whole lot of known bots. Across the Second Dimension is one of the tightest animated movies I've ever seen. The first 10 or so minutes play out like an average episode of the series, iconic catchphrases included, but almost everything here is setting up something to be paid off in the third act. From the obvious stuff such as Perry's locket to quick little jokes that you wouldn't expect to come back, like the platypult being towed. Dan and Swampy have always been adamant that kids deserve more credit and are smarter than most people realise, and that comes through perfectly in this movie, bringing a much more tense and dire tone as we explore this nightmarish version of Danville. Despite the stakes being raised, this movie still has the core identity of the show and knows exactly when to not take itself too seriously. The only complaint I really have is that the ending with the Amnesia-inator could have been set up better. Early in the movie, Monogram says that Owlcat are reverse engineering Doofenshmirtz, so it could have easily been brought up there. I just find it kind of odd since Doofenshmirtz was right. He never did make an Amnesia-inator. Its actual name is the Forget About It-inator, but that really is just a pedantic nitpick. I have become what I set out to destroy. So Across the Second Dimension has a near perfect story. What about Candace Against the Universe? Released in 2020 as a Disney Plus exclusive animated movie, the first of its kind, Candace Against the Universe focuses on how the events of every episode of the original series has negatively affected Candace's self-esteem, exhausting her and making her feel like she doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Wait, this is still a Phineas and Ferb movie, right? It is? Okay then. Candace is the main star here, and her story, which is a lot more personal and introspective, really helps to set this movie apart from Across the Second Dimension. But as a Phineas and Ferb fan, so much of the show's identity is either misrepresented or just flat out missing. They only use about 3 of the famous catchphrases, Ferb talks a little too much, and they don't even take time to reintroduce the characters, instead starting at what would be the end of a regular episode. Candace's journey of personal growth manages to make up for most of the movie's faults, as she's such a strong protagonist and her story really gives us a deep look into her psyche, not unlike the other time we got a deep look into her psyche. But Across the Second Dimension has all its pieces turning together in near perfect unison, whereas Candace Against the Universe still functions properly, but a few of the gears are missing. Point goes to Across the Second Dimension. But the story was never what made Phineas and Ferb. No, since the very beginning it's been all about these kids whose heads are shaped like the first letter of their names. So let's see how these movies do at incorporating and developing the characters. Okay, I'm going to try and keep these as brief as possible because these movies just love to pack so many characters into them. Let's start with the star of the new movie, Candace Flynn. As I said before, her arc is surprisingly complex and kinda profound for a character from this show. Throughout the movie, we watch her as she deals with her own self-worth and general unhappiness with how the world treats her, but all that changes when she becomes the chosen one of Feebeloot, which has a brilliant twist I dare not spoil here. As for Across the Second Dimension, Candace doesn't really have much of a point in the movie. Her arc starts off strong with her wanting to grow up, but then that's all forgotten as she hyperfixates on the mysterious force that takes away her brother's inventions. As soon as she enters the second dimension, her arc just kind of fizzles out and ends on a joke. I get they have a lot of ground to cover, but they really gave the most interesting character from the series the least to do. I mean, they even cut her only song from the movie. Phineas Flynn is the same optimistic and inventive triangle-headed boy that should never be viewed directly from the front that he's always been. However, personally, I find his portrayal in Candace Against the Universe to be more interesting. I'd argue he has more emotional range in this movie than he has ever had before, being written more innocent and naive like in season 1, which is great as towards the end of the show, Phineas honestly became really generic. That's not to say he's bad in Across the Second Dimension, far from it in fact, but Phineas is at his best when he's bouncing off others, which doesn't happen a lot in the movie since he's one of the only 3 main characters that talks a lot of the time. Ferb is Ferb, the man of a few words but a lot of gestures which don't get used in Candace Against the Universe. Like, seriously, Ferb never shrugs, gives a thumbs up, or even just blinks in response to something, which really makes him feel less defined as a character. So I will say Across the Second Dimension had the better Ferb, though some credit to Candace Against the Universe for having a Ferb line with the ability to make people cry.
You may not be the chosen one,
but we'd choose you as a sister every time.
Perry is very much sidelined in Candace Against the Universe, working from the shadows to keep everyone safe, which is kind of a step down, but considering he got top billing in Across the Second Dimension, I see why they did that, even if they had to retcon one of the show's most iconic running gags to make it work.
Tell me, other dimension me, what do you see here? An ordinary platypus? And now, what do you see? Perry the platypus! You know, I'm starting to see why you haven't become a ruler in your dimension.
As for Across the Second Dimension, this is easily Perry's best appearance, giving him more depth than ever before, with the only exception possibly being his and Doofenshmirtz's breakup story during It's About Time. I love that we really get to see him interact with Phineas and Ferb and show what that relationship means on his side, which we only got brief glimpses of during the show. Doofenshmirtz is just perfect in both these movies. In Across the Second Dimension, we get to explore how he really isn't evil by teaming him up with himself, giving him a new straight man to play off, and even having him save the day in the end. Candace Against the Universe only has one of his schemes in the very beginning, whereas the rest of the movie is him trying to save Vanessa, who was abducted with Candace, meaning we get an entire movie that is just Doofenshmirtz being the best parent in all of fiction, which I really appreciate. Really, I can't pick between either of these portrayals. Super Big Doctor is the only notable new character in Candace Against the Universe, played by Ali Wong, who most people know as a stand-up comedian, but I personally know her as Bertie from Tuca and Bertie. While I'm still unsure how I feel about her role in the story, from the second she appeared on screen, I fell in love with this character. She's the perfect balance of sincerity and sarcasm that makes for a really funny but still threatening enough antagonist, and she makes for a really amazing foil for Candace. The big gimmick of Across the Second Dimension is seeing all these gritty alternate versions of our favourite characters. However, most of them don't really get enough screen time to give them defined personalities. The most characterization we got for Second Dimension Isabella is this one look. Second Dimension Buford is defined by a really good joke about being so good at resisting that he started resisting the resistance, and Second Dimension Balji is just Balji but with better hair. Phineas and Ferb's counterparts play their role in the story well, but they aren't all that memorable. While we're talking about them though, does anyone else find it odd basically none of the promotional material for the Phineas and Ferb movie actually featured Phineas and Ferb and instead shows their alternate dimension selves? Like, I'm not scared to Weasley, but that thought keeps me up at night. The only two second dimension counterparts really worth discussing are Doofenshmirtz and Candace. Doof because he's the villain of the movie, and I mean, it's still Doofenshmirtz, so he's one of the comedic highlights, especially since he gets to play the straight man to himself. And Candace because this version of her has a better arc than the Candace we're familiar with, essentially being the fourth protagonist. After her childhood was stolen from her by Doofenshmirtz's rise to power, she became the hard-boiled leader of the resistance. It also helps that she has the best action scenes in the movie and some of the best character animation I've ever seen in this show. As for the other characters, Isabella, Balji and Buford don't really become relevant until the third act of Across the Second Dimension, whereas Candace Against the Universe utilizes them a lot more. Isabella has a great dynamic with Doofenshmirtz, which you could argue gives her her own little arc in the movie, and Buford and Balji are mostly our comic relief with their own running gags, which are roles they fill well enough. Though I don't know why Space Adventure is suddenly a TV show mostly inspired by Star Trek, when in the series it was always presented as a movie franchise that was a combination of Star Wars and Star Trek. Across the Second Dimension has really great characters, but I feel Candace Against the Universe utilises them much better in my opinion. And Candace is the most interesting and well-written character on the show, so naturally the one where she takes the spotlight is going to win out on this front. Point goes to Candace Against the Universe. But now that we've discussed the movie aspect of an animated movie, let's talk about the other half. So which of these movies' art belongs on the top of the fridge? It's Across the Second Dimension. Yeah, I'm not going to beat around the bush here. Across the Second Dimension is better in this category purely because the animation is consistent throughout. While most of Candace Against the Universe honestly looks better than Across the Second Dimension in my opinion, the first 20 or so minutes look more like flash animated web shorts than a big budget Phineas and Ferb movie. Everything after the first act looks fantastic and is everything you'd want from a Phineas and Ferb production. But you can tell there were 3 studios working on this. I mean, they look more like promotional vectors than they do characters from the show. Both of these movies have absolutely gorgeous backgrounds, with Candace Against the Universes being much more detailed with the lush jungle environments of Feebaloo, whereas Across the Second Dimension's backgrounds are more interesting stylistically, taking the random geometric patterns that typically populate the scenes of the show and replacing them with more restricted patterns and sometimes walls of text help make this location the viewers had come to know over the show's first 4 years feel new and unsettling. Had Candace Against the Universe's first act been the same visual quality as the rest of the movie, it might have stood a fighting chance, but that first 20 minutes doesn't give you the best first impressions of the movie, even though the writing and music managed to make up for it. Point goes to Across the Second Dimension. But people are mainly coming to Phineas and Ferb for one thing: infectious songs that you can't get out of your head, no matter how hard you try. So, let's take a look at which of these movies has the better soundtrack. Let's start with Candace Against the Universe, which features 13 brand new songs, only 7 of which are both longer than 30 seconds and actually appear in the movie. A lot of these are really good songs, but there's only a few I feel could stand with the series best. Those being Such a Beautiful Day, Adulting, and Us Against the Universe. The Universes Against Me and Into the Great Unknown would also be up there if they weren't cut from the movie. But that leaves us with 4 other songs, and they're okay. Unsung Hero and Girls' Day Out feel very much like songs in season 4, a lot of which were quite bland and only played over a montage with little connection to the characters or story. They're nice songs to listen to while watching the movie, but nothing I'd seek out on its own. This Is Our Battle song is good, but far too short and ends abruptly. So Candace Against the Universe's soundtrack is a mixed bag, but how does Across the Second Dimension do? Well, remember a moment ago when I said only a few songs from Candace Against the Universe could stack up with the series best? I'd like you to meet the series best. Chances are I could name any song from this movie and you could probably remember every lyric. Everything's Better with Perry, Brand New Best Friend, Summer, Where Do We Begin, Brand New Reality, Robot Riot, and then in the end credits, we got Kick It Up a Notch, one of the most underrated songs in the entire franchise. Every song in this movie stands out and you could easily listen to them on their own, which unfortunately can't be said for a lot of Candace Against the Universe's soundtrack. Even the joke songs like I Walk Away work because they are connected to the emotions of the characters. It also has Olivia Olsen's beautiful singing voice. Every single one of these songs has become iconic and stood the test of time, whereas I only think that will happen with a few songs from Candace Against the Universe. Candace Against the Universe has a good soundtrack, but Across the Second Dimension has some of the best songs you could possibly find in an animated movie, especially one made for TV. Final point goes to Across the Second Dimension, which means Across the Second Dimension wins overall. While I adore both these movies, it's easy to see that Across the Second Dimension is the much better Phineas and Ferb movie. While I love the more emotional scenes and characters of Candace Against the Universe more, Across the Second Dimension just has the more impressive and consistent visuals, a tighter and well-paced story, the most memorable songs, and just overall represents the style of the show better in my opinion. Maybe with a few more rewatches, my views on Candace Against the Universe might start to change, but for now, the original has it beat. Thanks for watching, folks. See you real soon.
I guess I'll see